The Battle of Mesopotamia was not a single event, but a historical period marking the development of conflicts between the kingdoms of Sumer and Akkad, ending with the victory of Akkad under Sargon the Great. Akkad built a more professional army, conquered the cities of Sumer, unified the region, and established the first empire, replacing the Sumerian militia system with a professional standing army.
Hey guys, tonight we drift back through time to the cradle of civilization itself. You stand where two great rivers spread their fingers through a dry plain, their waters carving life into the dust. The Tigris rushes swiftly with a dangerous current, while the Euphrates bends and meanders, dropping rich silt along its banks. In this place, green reeds grow, thick frogs croak in muddy pools, and the air carries the shimmer of heat over endless fields. Here, the people of Sumer raised their first villages, their homes built of clay bricks, shaped by hand and baked beneath the sun. You can almost feel the warmth of that clay against your palm, rough and porous, yet sturdy enough to shelter a family. So take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I love knowing who listens around the world, so drop a comment with your location and local time.
Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The scene before you is vibrant, though quiet in its own way. The first farmers bend beneath the sun, sowing barley and wheat into narrow strips of damp soil. Their fields rely on careful irrigation, the kind that takes whole communities to dig and maintain. You can hear the scrape of wooden hoes, the slap of mud as canals are shaped, the trickle of water diverted into furrows. Life is tied completely to the rivers, their floods both blessing and terror. Too little water and the land shrivels, too much and whole settlements are washed away. A mainstream historical fact settles into your awareness. The Sumerians developed the first known system of writing, cuneiform, pressed into damp clay with a reed stylus. But at this early moment before the tablets multiply, the world is mostly oral songs carried on, the wind stories told beside small fires, prayers whispered toward the skies. Still, the need to record debts, harvests, and temple offerings is stirring, and with it the seeds of history itself. Your steps take you closer to the bustling heart of one such village. Goats bleat from enclosures, their shaggy coats brushing against woven fences. Children chase each other, their laughter light and shrill, even as dust clings to their legs. Women grind grain between heavy stones, the rhythm steady, almost musical. Above it all rises a temple platform, just a mound of earth and reeds at this early stage, but already sacred to the gods who seem to live in every gust of wind and roll of thunder. There's an ancient and curious tidbit here. The people of Sumer brewed one of the world's earliest beers, thick and cloudy, sipped through long straws from communal jars. Imagine sitting with them at dusk, the jar cool against your fingertips, as neighbors lean close to share both drink and story. The flavor is yeasty and raw, but it binds the community together, easing the weight of long labor. You pause by the water's edge, and in the shallows you see coracles, small round boats of reed tarred with bitumen so they float like enormous baskets. Men paddle them along canals, moving goods from field to field. You notice how closely everything depends on cooperation, watershed tools, exchanged grain stored in communal granaries. Yet beneath the harmony lies the first hint of rivalry, as villages compete for the most fertile land, the most reliable canals, the favor of the gods. Historians still argue whether these first settlements emerged independently or were influenced by earlier peoples drifting from the north or east. Did farming take root here by invention or by imitation? The evidence is faint, scattered in shards of pottery and ancient foundations hidden beneath the soil. What is clear is that by 5,000 years ago, the land between the rivers was humming with life, its villages slowly growing into towns, and those towns preparing to rise into the first true cities. The night deepens in your imagination, the stars beginning to prick holes in the velvet sky. You feel the pulse of this place, humanity's fragile yet determined step into a new way of living. No longer just hunters chasing herds or gatherers plucking wild grain, these people anchor themselves to land and water, and in doing so they anchor us all. Civilization, its noise, its order, its dreams, begins here in the cradle between the rivers. You linger in the growing towns of Sumer, where the horizon is punctured by rising platforms of earth and brick. At first glance they look like hills, but step closer, and you see order-layered mud bricks stacked carefully, their edges pressed flat with hands that know the weight of clay. These are the beginnings of the great ziggurats temples built to bridge the human and divine. You tilt your head upward, following the slope of narrow stairways that climb skyward, carrying offerings of grain goats and incense smoke into the air. The scent of burning cedar drifts faintly, mixing with the tang of river mud. Inside the temple precinct, priests move with quiet purpose. Their robes are white linen, brushed clean in river water, the folds stiff from drying in the sun. They record tributes on small clay tablets, numbers pressed in with styluses, each wedge-shaped mark another step into the future of writing. You watch their hands, quick and practiced, shaping meaning out of marks. Around them, villagers wait with baskets of figs, jars of oil, and rolls of wool. The temple is more than a house of worship. It is the storehouse, the court, the heart of Sumerian life. A mainstream historical fact comes to you. Sumerian ziggurats were not smooth pyramids like those of Egypt, but stepped structures, terraced levels rising one atop another. Each level was smaller than the one below, a stairway to heaven built from mud and sweat. And unlike tombs sealed for eternity, these temples were alive with daily ritual. The gods thought to descend upon them like shimmering light settling on stone. The air buzzes with chanting. You hear a prayer to Inanna, goddess of love and war, her name called softly, her statue dressed in glittering beads of lapis lazuli. The Sumerians believe she can bless harvests, but also unleash chaos. You notice offerings of date wine poured carefully before her drops dark as blood against the pale altar stone. Around you, candles flicker in clay lamps, shadows trembling on reed mats. An ancient and curious tidbit stirs your attention. Temple kitchens once baked sacred loaves shaped in the likeness of animals, perhaps as substitutes for sacrifice. Imagine a soft-bread goat placed at a god's feet, its form simple, yet symbolic, a gentle gesture in place of a bloodier one. The warmth of the oven clings to the bread, the crust crackling, the scent wafting down the temple, steps to mingle with the evening air. You wander outward into the city itself. Narrow lanes snake between houses of clay walls coated in plaster that crumbles at the touch. Children chalk simple marks on those walls, perhaps mimicking the writing of priests. Goats nudge their way through alleys bleating for scraps. At the edges of the settlement lie gardens and small orchards, date palms rising tall, their fronds rustling against the dry breeze. The ziggurat looms above all this, an anchor to the divine. Each city has its own temple, its own patron god. Here is where rivalries sharpen. One city praises Enlil, the storm god. Another serves Shamash, the sun. Each believes their god supreme, and so the competition of cities becomes the competition of heavens. Historians still argue whether the earliest temples arose from pure devotion or whether they were also instruments of control, a way for priestly elites to command labor and resources under divine sanction. Was faith the spark, or was power the goal? In either case, the result is the same: thousands gather to build hauling baskets of mud, cutting reeds by the marsh, shaping the first monuments of the human story. As dusk comes, the temple glows in torchlight. You picture yourself climbing those stairs, feeling the rough stone under your fingertips. At the top, a small shrine waits cool and dim, the air scented with incense. Beyond it lies the wide sky, stars, wheeling gods imagined as bright figures crossing the heavens. The people of Sumer sleep beneath those stars, yet they believe the gods sleep closer still, just beyond the temple's peak. The hum of voices fades into silence, leaving only the whisper of wind through reeds. You stand at the threshold of belief and architecture, where faith takes physical form in rising brick. Civilization is not only built of walls and fields, but of stories given shape, gods given homes. And in this place under torchlight and stars, you feel the first weight of permanence, an unshakable foundation of clay and prayer, binding earth to heaven. You move deeper into the story where Sumer's cities grow in both splendor and tension. Canals stretch further, walls rise taller, and temple towers stand prouder. Yet beneath the surface, something shifts. At first, power lies in the hands of priests, the En, who interpret the god's will, balancing offerings with decrees. But slowly you sense another figure stepping forward, the Lugal, the big man, a king whose authority rests not only on divine whispers, but on soldiers' steel. The city streets tell the tale. In a bustling market, merchants haggle over copper ingots, barley sacks, and wool bundles. The air is thick with smells, sheep dung, fresh breadfish, drying in the sun. Around the edges, men in leather helmets and cloaks of wool carry spears, their eyes scanning for trouble. They are not temple guards, they are warriors, sworn to a ruler, the beginnings of standing armies. And in their presence you feel the tilt of power shifting away from clay tablets and prayers toward the grip of martial might. A mainstream historical fact anchors this moment. By the 3rd millennium BCE, Sumerian kingship had become hereditary, with dynasties forming in cities like Ur, Uruk, and Lagash. The Lugal claimed not just to serve the gods, but to be chosen by them, merging spiritual legitimacy with worldly authority. No longer merely a manager of irrigation canals, the ruler becomes a commander of men, a symbol of unity, and sometimes a rival to the priests themselves. You pass by one of these kings' palaces. Unlike the ziggurats which climb heavenward, the palace sprawls outward, its thick walls enclosing courtyards filled with scribes, guards, and artisans. Clay tablets are stacked on shelves, their wedge-shaped impressions tracking harvest taxes, conscript lists, and trade agreements. Inside, musicians play lyres, strung with gut, their songs praising the Lugal's victories. The sound drifts into the evening air, carried along with the fragrance of roasted lamb reserved for those of status. An ancient and curious tidbit emerges here. Some kings wore ceremonial beards made of intricately woven wool, stiffened with wax to imitate divine perfection. Imagine the heavy warmth of it against your face, a mask of power designed not to deceive, but to elevate, to place the man closer to the gods. The beard glitters faintly in torchlight, every curl a statement of majesty. Tensions grow sharper. City fights, city often over water rights, as canals divert rivers one way or another. You picture men standing waist-deep in muddy trenches, hacking at earthen dams, redirecting flows to starve rival fields. Armies march not far behind their sandals, slapping dust, their bronze weapons gleaming beneath the sun. These conflicts, written later on clay stelae, are both mundane and cosmic, practical battles for land and water, yet framed as contests between gods. Historians still argue whether these early wars were constant and chaotic, or whether periods of peace endured longer than the records suggest. After all, victories are etched in stone while quiet years slip away in silence. Was the land between the rivers a perpetual battlefield or a patchwork quilt of alliances and truces, broken only at times of drought? The truth likely lies in a shifting rhythm where rivalry and cooperation traded places like the seasons. You picture yourself at a council gathering. Priests chant omens read in sheep livers, their voices low and trembling, while warriors stand in iron silence waiting for orders. The Lugal sits at the center, his hand resting on a ceremonial mace, his brow furrowed as if already burdened by destiny. Around him voices rise, debates over alliances, pleas for temple funding, demands for soldiers to march. The room feels tense, as though history itself hangs in the balance with each decision. In the streets beyond, life goes on. Women spin wool on low stools. Children chase each other through dusty courtyards. Merchants haul jars of beer to the taverns. Yet all of them feel the presence of kingship settling over their lives, subtle at first, then heavy as the palace grows. Where once the gods held sway, now men claim their voices as divine, and with that claim comes an empire of flesh and ambition. The sky fades to dusk, the city's lamps glowing faintly in niches along walls. You realize that power itself is changing shape, no longer diffused, no longer tied, only to the rhythm of harvest and prayer. A human hand now reaches for permanence, for rulership, passed from father to son, for control that will extend beyond the city walls. The world is shifting, and with it you feel the first tremors of a greater conflict on the horizon. You drift northward now, leaving behind the clustered cities of Sumer. The land stretches wider, drier, and a different rhythm fills the air. The irrigation canals of the south thin into simpler ditches, and the villages you pass seem smaller, more scattered, yet ambitious in their quiet strength. This is the world of Akkad, a land whose name will one day eclipse Sumer's, though for now it lingers on the edges of history, poised to rise. The markets here feel leaner. Merchants trade not only grain, but also stone and timber, hauled from the north, resources the flat southern plains lack. The scent of cedar clings to the carts, rough logs dragged in from distant forests. Bronze tools are sharpened on flat stones, their edges glinting in the sunlight. Men speak in a dialect that feels familiar, yet distinct Akkadian. A tongue related to the Semitic languages that will dominate much of the ancient Near East. You hear its cadence in shouts, in bargaining cries, in lullabies, hummed to restless children. A mainstream historical fact shapes your thoughts. Akkad was not only a city, though its precise location remains uncertain. It was also the core of a people who would transform Mesopotamia. While Sumer pioneered city life and writing, Akkad would build something new, political unification, through conquest and empire that pulled far-flung lands into one sphere. The seed of empire takes root here, in the mingling of north and south. At the city's heart, smaller temples rise less towering than the ziggurats of Uruk or Ur. Yet their devotion is just as intense. You smell incense made from resins, traded over long distances, and you hear prayers spoken to Shamash, the sun god, and to Ishtar, goddess of love and war. The air feels taut with ambition, as though even the gods themselves whisper of expansion. An ancient and curious tidbit catches your attention. Akkadian soldiers were said to carry curved, sickle-shaped swords weapons that gleamed like crescent moons in torchlight. Unlike the straight spears and maces of earlier Sumerian warfare, these blades could slash as well as thrust, leaving enemies bewildered at their speed. Imagine standing among them, the clang of bronze on bronze ringing through the dust, the curve of the blade catching the sun as though the heavens themselves favored Akkad. The people here are restless. They know the wealth of Sumer to the south, its temples, its overflowing granaries, its artistry in gold and lapis lazuli, Yet they also know its rivalries, city against city, priest against king, each too busy fighting neighbors to see the larger danger looming. Akkad watches with patient eyes, noting every quarrel, every vulnerability, every gap in Sumer's defenses. Historians still argue whether Akkad's rise was inevitable or accidental. Was it born of long, simmering cultural strength, or did it depend entirely on one remarkable leader, a man who would seize the chance when Sumer's city-states were distracted? The answer may be both, or neither, the truth blurred in the clay of broken tablets. Yet you feel the inevitability of change pressing forward like the slow advance of a flood. Night falls over the Akkadian plains and the stars stretch clear and bright across the sky. You hear the howl of jackals in the distance, their cries echoing over the barren hills. Villagers sit in quiet circles around fires eating bread with lentil stew, their eyes reflecting sparks of flame. Among them, warriors polish weapons, their faces intent, their thoughts already fixed on glory. The air smells of smoke and ambition, as though the land itself knows it is waiting for something, a figure, to step forward and claim destiny. You glance southward, where Sumer's ziggurats rise faint against the horizon. Two worlds alike in devotion to gods alike in love of rivers and grain, yet divided by language, by ambition, and by fate. The rivalry between Akkad and Sumer is no longer just a possibility. It is a story stirring awake its first pages, turning in the wind that whistles across the plain. And you, standing here at the threshold, feel history lean forward, ready to quicken its pace. In the hush of dawn, a new story begins to unfold. You find yourself near the banks of a river, watching a basket of reeds drift quietly on the current. Inside, wrapped tightly against the cool air, lies a newborn child. His name is whispered later as Sargon, though now he is only a helpless infant cradled by water and fate. His tale begins in secrecy, his origins shrouded in both myth and memory. The legend tells that his mother was a temple priestess forbidden to bear children, and so she placed her son in that basket, sealing him with pitch, releasing him to the flow. You imagine her hands trembling her whispered prayer to the gods as she lets go. The basket rocks gently, bumping against reeds, drifting past startled fish, until it is drawn ashore by a humble gardener who takes the child in. This gardener raises him not as royalty, but as one of the common people, his cradle not a palace, but the earth itself. A mainstream historical fact anchors this myth. Sargon would one day be known as Sargon of Akkad, the first ruler to create a true Mesopotamian empire, stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. Yet his beginnings are framed in the language of destiny, a child of mystery who rose from obscurity. Like so many great leaders in history, his birth story was cast in myth to prove that his rise was not merely chance, but divine design. The young boy grows in strength and curiosity. He learns to till the soil, to carry water jars, to weave baskets, but also to watch the world with hungry eyes. His foster father serves the king of Kish, and in time, Sargon is taken into that court as a cupbearer. You picture him there, young and sharp, pouring wine into the king's goblet, listening more than he speaks. Each sip he serves is also an opportunity. Every council meeting, every dispute, every whisper of strategy he absorbs like parched earth, soaking up rain. An ancient and curious tidbit lingers here. Some sources claim Sargon's name means the true king or the legitimate king. Yet paradoxically, he was anything but legitimate by birth. The irony itself seems woven into his story, a man with no royal blood, who nonetheless bears the name of rightful sovereignty, as though fate was announcing itself long before he sat on a throne. The palace of Kish buzzes with intrigue. Priests declare omens from sheep, entrails, generals bark orders, scribes scratch out records of tribute, and in the midst of it all stands Sargon carrying jugs, pouring drinks, watching everything. You feel the tension in the air, the rivalries among the nobles, the restless ambition of the king himself. This is a place where alliances are fragile, where one bold move can topple all. Historians still argue whether Sargon truly began as a lowly servant, or whether his humble origins were later invention, a story crafted to endear him to the common people and to sanctify his power. Was he really plucked from the river like a forgotten child of fate, or was he always close to power, his rise less miraculous than it seemed? The records are too few, the myths too thick to peel away from fact. And so you walk, with both possibilities in mind, feeling the weight of uncertainty. Night falls over Kish. In the palace courtyard, oil lamps flicker, casting long shadows across the walls. Sargon sits quietly on a low bench, watching the stars. He is no king yet, no conqueror, no master of empires, only a man with silent dreams, his heart thudding with something larger than the life he has been given. You almost hear his thoughts, a longing to rise, to step beyond his station, to seize the destiny the gods may or may not have chosen for him. The river still flows nearby, carrying reeds and reflections. You recall the image of that basket drifting, a fragile vessel against the sweep of currents. Sargon's life feels much the same, carried forward by unseen forces, fragile and unstoppable all at once. And as you sit with him in the quiet dark, you know his journey is only beginning, the cradle of his ambition rocking gently with the river's song. The air grows hotter as you follow Sargon into manhood, the wide plains shimmering with light. You hear the ring of bronze against bronze, the grunt of soldiers training in dusty courtyards. Sargon is no longer a boy who pours wine in the palace of Kish. He has become a leader of men forging bonds, not with priests or scribes, but with warriors whose calloused hands grip weapons until their knuckles whiten. His rise is not delicate, it is hammered like metal in the furnace shaped by the will to command. You stand among the training grounds. Soldiers practice with short spears, wooden shields strapped to their arms. The crash of blows echoes, sweat drips, dust rises. Bronze helmets glint like miniature suns as the men turn and clash in formation. You notice how discipline is being forged alongside weapons. This is not the loose levy of farmers Sumer once fielded in times of need. This is something new, a permanent army drilled and hardened. The scent of oiled leather mixes with the sharp tang of blood from scraped knuckles. A mainstream historical fact gives weight to the scene. Sargon is credited with creating one of the world's first professional army soldiers who served year-round rather than disbanding after the harvest. This innovation gave him power unmatched by the city-states of Sumer, who still relied on temporary militias. For the first time in Mesopotamia, war was not an occasional disruption, it became a constant tool of politics, a standing presence. You wander through the camp and see a curious detail. Soldiers are issued ration tablets, small pieces of clay that entitle them to bread, beer, and oil. Each wedge-shaped mark promises sustenance in exchange for service. An ancient and curious tidbit whispers here, some of these tablets bear the earliest names of ordinary men, the soldiers themselves preserved for thousands of years in fired clay. Their voices are gone, but their rations remain a faint echo of lives lived in the dust of empire. Sargon moves among his men with ease. He eats with them, drinks their thick beer, sharpens his own blade beside theirs. His charisma is not distant, but immediate, a closeness that breeds loyalty. You hear laughter around campfires, stories exchanged, oaths sworn in the crackle of flame. The soldiers call him not just king, but father protector, the one who leads from the front. The bond between man and ruler is being reforged into something iron strong. Historians still argue whether this innovation was truly Sargon's invention, or whether earlier kings of Sumer had experimented with standing troops before him. Was his army truly the first, or was it simply the most successful? The evidence lies scattered in broken records, each shard too small to confirm. Yet what endures is the image of a force unlike any before, loyal not to city or temple, but to a single man. You see the fruits of this military strength in the field. Akkadian soldiers march in rows carrying sickle swords curved like the crescent moon. Their shields lock together a wall of bronze and wood. Slingers whirl stones overhead, releasing them with sharp cracks that break bones from afar. Archers crouch with bows of wood and sinew, their arrows tipped with bronze. Each unit moves with precision, the result of training rather than hurried levies. The sound of their feet stomping the earth in unison rumbles like thunder across the plains. At night, you sit by their fires, the smell of roasted onions and flatbread thick in the air. Sargon speaks softly, his words carried on the smoke. He tells them not of riches, but of destiny, the promise that Akkad is meant to rise, to unite what has long been divided. The men listen, their eyes reflecting flame, their hearts swelling with belief. For them, loyalty is no longer to city or priest, but to a leader who embodies ambition itself. The camp grows quiet, soldiers drifting into sleep on mats of woven reeds. You gaze at the sky stars shimmering above the Akkadian plain. The Milky Way stretches like a river of light, echoing the Tigris and Euphrates below. In that silence, you feel the weight of change, the forging of an army, the shaping of empire, the shift from fragile city-states to a power that will not dissolve with the seasons. In the rhythm of marching feet and the gleam of polished bronze, the Akkadian dream takes shape, and you standing among them sense how history is being reforged not just by clay and water, but by the will of men who believe in the steel they carry, and in the leader who commands them with a voice that sounds like destiny. The dust of the plain clings to your sandals as you follow Sargon's army southward toward the proud city of Kish. This is no small village tucked among reeds. Kish has long claimed preeminence among Sumerian cities, its kings boasting of authority over all the land. But today that boast will be tested. The walls rise before you thick and sun-baked, topped with defenders gripping spears and shouting defiance. Behind those walls lie temples, markets, and homes, all bracing for the storm that Akkad is about to unleash. The soldiers tighten ranks, shields glinting, bronze weapons ready. You hear the low rumble of drums steady as a heartbeat guiding the advance. The air smells of sweat dust and tension. Slingers step forward, their stones whistling against the battlements, cracking into shields and helmets. Archers bend their bows, arrows slicing upward in graceful arcs that vanish into the sky before plunging down like stinging rain. From the walls above, defenders answer with their own arrows and hurled stones that clash, ringing out across the plain. A mainstream historical fact fixes itself in your thought. Kish was one of the earliest and most powerful Sumerian cities, so much so that later traditions claimed kingship itself descended first to Kish after the flood. For Sargon to conquer Kish was not merely to seize a city, it was to seize legitimacy, to proclaim that Akkad had inherited divine rule over the two rivers. In this moment, conquest is not just military, it is symbolic, a blow at the very heart of Sumerian pride. You watch the Akkadian troops push forward, rolling siege ladders against the walls. Dust clouds rise as men strain to lift them, arrows clattering against wood. With grunts and shouts, the ladders slam into place and soldiers begin to climb, shields raised above their heads. The defenders jab down with spears, push at the ladders, hurl stones, but the Akkadians surge upward in relentless waves. A curious and ancient tidbit drifts to you. Some accounts suggest Akkadian soldiers smeared bitumen on their shields, making them slick and harder for flaming arrows to catch. Picture it, the dark tar shining under the sun, the acrid smell clinging to the air, a simple trick that might mean the difference between victory and fiery ruin. The clash intensifies. You hear the crack of wood splintering, the sharp cries of men as ladders topple. For a moment the defense holds, but Sargon is no ordinary commander. He moves among his troops, rallying, urging, lifting fallen men to their feet. His presence is electric, his words carried across the field like the pulse of a drum. Slowly, inevitably, the Akkadians gain ground. Soldiers spill over the battlements, bronze blades, flashing shields, shoving defenders back step by step. Historians still argue whether Kish fell swiftly under Sargon's assault or whether it endured a long, bitter siege. The tablets that survive are fragmentary, the details unclear. Was the city overwhelmed in days, or did its people resist for months, starving and desperate before surrendering? You feel both versions in your bones, the swift, shocking collapse and the grinding attrition of a city cut off from its lifeblood. Either way, the outcome is certain. Kish, the proud, the ancient, is broken beneath Akkad's rise. The gates eventually creak open, groaning like the sigh of the defeated. Akkadian soldiers march in boots echoing on stone streets, their banners fluttering with the symbol of their king. You move among the people of Kish, their faces etched with fear, grief, and weary resignation. Some wail for lost fathers, some kneel before the conquerors, some simply stare in silence as their world tilts on its axis. Sargon stands in the temple courtyard, his hand resting on a sacred statue. He does not topple it, he claims it. His gesture is not to erase, but to absorb, to take the gods of Kish and declare them his own. In that act, you feel the shift. Kish is no longer the keeper of kingship. Akkad is. The murmurs spread like wind through reeds, unsettling yet undeniable. As dusk settles, torches flicker against the walls that once defied Akkad. Smoke drifts from cooking fires, mingling with the fading scent of battle. The city is subdued, its pride shattered, its destiny rewritten. You stand in the quiet aftermath where victory feels heavy, almost sorrowful, yet unstoppable. The fall of Kish is more than a conquest. It is a signal, a declaration to every city of Sumer that a new power strides across the land, one that will not be ignored. The air is heavy with dust and anticipation as you follow Sargon's armies deeper into Sumer, where the great city of Uruk waits like a lion in its den. Uruk is no ordinary city. It is the legendary home of Gilgamesh, a place of vast walls and storied might where ziggurats rise toward the heavens, and the name itself rings with pride. To conquer Uruk is to challenge not only a city but a myth. You walk through the Akkadian camp where soldiers tighten straps on their helmets and sharpen blades until sparks flicker in the dusk. Fires crackle, casting orange light over weary faces, while priests murmur prayers to Ishtar, seeking her favor for the day ahead. In the distance, the walls of Uruk loom high, their mud-brick bulk stretching nearly 6 miles around, so thick that chariots can ride abreast atop them. You run your hand along the rough brick and feel the weight of centuries pressing back, daring any invader to try. A mainstream historical fact strikes you here. Uruk was one of the world's first true cities, with roots stretching back to the 4th millennium BCE. By Sargon's time, it had become a symbol of Sumerian endurance, a city whose very existence seemed proof of divine favor. To storm its walls was to prove Akkad's supremacy beyond question. The battle begins in a roar. Akkadian rams, their wooden frames covered with hides, batter against the gates. The boom echoes through the air like thunder. Stones rain down from the battlements. Slingers crack whips of leather arrows hiss through the sky. You hear the sickening thud as they strike shields and flesh alike. The air grows thick with dust and smoke, choking, blinding the ground, trembling with the weight of men. A curious and ancient tidbit surfaces from the chaos. Some texts suggest Uruk's defenders unleashed wild animals during sieges, lions or hunting dogs set loose to scatter enemy ranks. Imagine the sudden roar of a lion leaping from a gate teeth, flashing soldiers stumbling back in shock. Whether true or not, the story lingers a reminder that Uruk's pride extended even to its defenses. Sargon moves among his warriors like a steady flame in the storm. His voice cuts through the din, urging men forward. Siege ladders crash against the walls, their rungs slick with sweat and blood. Soldiers climb shields strapped to their backs, swords clutched in trembling hands. Defenders hack at the ladders, push them away, shout curses down. For hours the struggle sways back and forth, no side yielding. Historians still argue whether Uruk ever fell fully to Akkad, or if it resisted stubbornly, submitting only after years of pressure and negotiation. Some suggest that its conquest was partial, its spirit never truly broken. Others believe Sargon took it by force, his victory complete. The clay tablets whisper fragments, but certainty slips through like water through reeds. In the streets of Uruk, panic spreads. Families clutch jars of water rushing to wells, while priests gather sacred statues, hoping to hide them from plunder. The temple of Inanna rings with chants, voices trembling as if the goddess herself might descend to save them. You feel the desperation, the city holding its breath, waiting to see if its legends can withstand steel. The Akkadian assault surges once more, louder, fiercer. A breach opens in the wall, bricks collapsing in a cloud of dust. Through it pour the invaders, shields locked, voices raised in a deafening cry. The clash spills into the narrow streets, bronze on bronze, the rhythm of conquest beating against the heart of Uruk. And yet even in defeat, Uruk's spirit lingers. Its walls may crumble, its defenders scatter, its temples be plundered, but the story of Uruk cannot be erased. In the hearts of its people, and in the memory of the world, Uruk remains more than a city. It is an idea, a legend, a reminder that even conquest cannot erase myth. As night falls, the fires burn both in Akkad's camp and within the wounded city. Smoke coils upward into the star-strewn sky, a mingling of victory and loss. You stand among the ruins, feeling the pulse of history. Sargon has struck down another jewel of Sumer, yet the glow of Uruk's legend refuses to dim. The clash between Akkad and Sumer is far from over. It has only grown sharper, more bitter, and more unforgettable. The air along the river grows heavier as you approach Ur, the jewel of southern Sumer. Here the Euphrates bends gracefully its waters, feeding canals that glisten like silver threads through farmland. Palms sway their fronds, hissing in the breeze, and the smell of baked fish and date wine lingers over the bustling harbour. Boats crowd the docks, reed coracles, wooden barges, all stacked with goods from faraway lands. Ur is wealthy, proud, a city of merchants and priests, of music and stories. To bring it low is to break one of the strongest pillars of Sumer. The ziggurat of Ur rises above all, a massive tower of brick and faith, dedicated to Nanna the moon god. Its shadow stretches long over the city, as evening falls, a reminder of the divine presence guarding every street. You imagine climbing its stairways, hearing the soft chants of priests smelling incense carried on the night wind. From its summit, Ur seems eternal, untouchable. Yet beyond its walls, Sargon's Akkadian army gathers ready to prove otherwise. The Akkadian soldiers march with grim purpose, shields strapped tight, bronze blades gleaming. Siege works rise swiftly, ramps of mud piled against the walls, battering rams braced, with leather ladders stretching high. Drums echo across the plain, a steady pulse, like the heartbeat of the coming storm. Inside the city, the defenders prepare with equal resolve, stacking stones, boiling bitumen, sharpening spears. You can almost feel the tension, the whole land holding its breath as the clash nears. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Ur was one of the most significant cities of Sumer, famed for its wealth and devotion to the gods. Its later kings, centuries after Sargon, would leave behind the world's earliest known law codes and stunning royal tombs filled with treasures. To conquer Ur was to seize more than land. It was to seize a legacy that stretched both backward and forward through time. The battle begins at dawn. Arrows hiss from the walls, their shadows fleeting across the ground. Akkadian slingers whirl stones, striking shields and helmets with sharp cracks. The air grows thick with dust smoke and the acrid stench of burning pitch. Battering rams thunder against the gate's wood, groaning with every strike. From above, defenders hurl heavy stones, their shouts rising in defiance. An ancient and curious tidbit echoes here. Ur's priests were said to sound silver trumpets from the ziggurat during crises, their notes rising clear and mournful over the city. You hear it now, a piercing cry, above the chaos, a call to the gods, to the moon itself, begging for deliverance. The sound sends a shiver through your chest, a reminder that this is not just a battle of men, but a plea for divine judgment. The clash rages on. Akkadian soldiers climb ladders, shields strapped to their backs. Defenders push them down the wooden frames, cracking as men tumble into the dust. But wave after wave surges forward, relentless, unstoppable. You hear the cries of exhaustion, the grinding determination that refuses to yield. Sargon moves among his men, his presence like a fire in the storm, lifting their spirits, urging them onward. Historians still argue whether Ur fell violently to Akkad's assault, or whether its leaders, faced with starvation and loss, eventually surrendered to preserve their people. The tablets tell different stories, their edges broken, their truths uncertain. Was the city burned and plundered, or did it bend reluctantly to Sargon's authority, its temples spared? The debate lingers unresolved, like smoke drifting long after flames die down. At last, the gates shudder open. Akkadian banners rise over the walls, their symbols fluttering in the wind. Soldiers march through Ur's streets, their sandals striking against stone. Merchants hide their treasures, priests clutch their idols, families huddle in silence. The city's proud spirit flickers, wounded, its brilliance dimmed beneath the shadow of Akkad. Sargon enters the temple of Nanna, placing his hand on the sacred altar. Like Kish, before he does not destroy, he claims, the gods of Ur are folded into his empire, their power now tied to his name. The priests bow reluctantly, their chants low and bitter, but they bow nonetheless. Night falls and the ziggurat glows faintly in the torchlight. Smoke drifts lazily over the rooftops, the taste of ash and salt lingering in the air. You walk through the silent streets, past closed doors and dim courtyards, sensing the grief that clings to the stones. Ur is subdued, its glory, tarnished, its destiny, entwined with Akkad. The jewel of Sumer has dimmed, and the empire of Sargon shines brighter than ever before. The dust of conquest still lingers in your lungs as you walk alongside Sargon, who now surveys a land stitched together by force of arms. Kish, Uruk and Ur lie under his control, their proud banners pull down, their gods folded into his keeping. Yet he does not pause. You feel his ambition pulsing like a drumbeat beneath the earth. It is not enough to take cities, he seeks to weave them into a single whole, to call himself king, not of one place, but of all Mesopotamia. The title comes first. In solemn ceremony, Sargon declares himself king of the four quarters of the world. The words echo across temple courtyards, shouted by heralds, carved into clay tablets, etched into the very imagination of his people. You stand in the crowd as the proclamation rings out the air, shimmering with heat, the smell of incense thick around you. Soldiers lift their spears in salute, priests bow grudgingly, and merchants whisper the title as if tasting a strange, new fruit. A mainstream historical fact grounds this moment. Sargon is recognized as the first ruler to unite the Sumerian city-states under a single sovereign authority, creating what many consider the world's first empire. Unlike the fleeting dominance of earlier kings, his rule extends over diverse peoples, languages, and lands. Mesopotamia, long divided, now bends beneath one name. Yet you notice something subtler. Sargon does not erase the cities, he rebinds them. Their temples remain, their gods still worshipped, but always under the shadow of Akkad. He stations loyal governors in conquered cities, their tablets stamped with his seal. He arranges marriages, grants lands, and ensures that priests and soldiers alike answer to him. The unity is fragile, but it is real, stitched with both silk and iron. An ancient and curious tidbit surfaces: clay seals from Sargon's reign have been found bearing the image of a servant pouring water over a tree while a king watches. Some scholars believe this symbolized Sargon himself, nurturing the unity of Mesopotamia, presenting himself not only as conqueror but as caretaker. You picture the scene, the water trickling the tree's roots, spreading the king's gaze, steady. It is a quiet image, yet it tells of power sustained not only by blood, but by growth. You walk through the capital, Akkad, the city that now gives its name to empire. Though its exact site remains lost to time in your mind, it rises vividly. Wide streets, bustling markets, palaces gleaming with polished stone. Merchants call out in Akkadian Sumerian, and tongues from far beyond. Bronze tools clatter on anvils. Oxen bellow in crowded yards. Children chase each other through dusty lanes. At the heart of it all stands the palace, its walls lined with guards, its courts alive with scribes pressing tablets into clay. Historians still argue whether Akkad itself was a purpose-built capital created by Sargon to symbolize unity, or whether it was an older settlement elevated to greatness. The debate lingers, sharpened by the frustration that the city's ruins have never been found. Was it washed away by floods, buried under later towns, or lost entirely to the shifting rivers? The mystery only deepens Akkad's aura, a city that lives as much in legend as in stone. In the evenings, feasts are held in celebration of conquest. Musicians strum lyres and pluck harps, their melodies winding through courtyards lit with torches. The aroma of roasted lamb and honey cakes fills the air, mingling with the tang of fermented beer. Sargon sits among his generals and governors, his eyes gleaming as he listens to reports from every corner of the land. You notice how he leans forward always, intent, always grasping the threads of his empire with unyielding fingers. And yet beneath the grandeur you sense fragility. The city-states of Sumer have bowed, but not gladly. Their priests grumble in whispers, their people dream of old independence. Their gods are uneasy in Akkadian hands. Unity has been proclaimed, but it must be enforced every day with soldiers on the march and scribes tallying tribute. You can almost hear the strain in the silence between the drums, a reminder that empires are living things both magnificent and brittle. Night falls over Akkad. From the palace terrace you gaze at the horizon where the moon hangs like a silver coin. Below the lamps of the city flicker thousands of points of light scattered like stars fallen to earth. For the first time in history, this land is truly one bound by conquest, by ambition, by the will of a single man who declared himself master of the four corners. And you, standing in the warm night breeze, feel the world itself turning into something new, an empire born from the clash of Sumer and Akkad. The roads stretch outward now, long ribbons of dust carrying the heartbeat of empire. You find yourself walking beside a caravan that rattles with promise, donkeys laden with sacks of grain, jars of oil, ingots of copper, and bundles of bright lapis lazuli. Traders shout to one another as wheels creak, their voices mingling with the bray of animals and the jingle of bronze harness rings. The empire of Akkad is not held together by swords alone. It hums with trade, with movement, with the quiet flow of wealth along paths that stretch far beyond the rivers. You follow the caravan westward, where the desert gives way to rocky hills and the scent of cedar rides the breeze. Logs are dragged down from distant forests, bound together with ropes, floated along rivers to shipyards. In the distance, you glimpse the glint of copper mined from mountains hammered into shape by blacksmiths whose forges glow red against the dusk. Every piece of material feeds Akkad's hunger for growth, its cities swelling with both tribute and trade. A mainstream historical fact shines here under Sargon and his successors. Akkad controlled trade routes that stretched from the Persian Gulf north into Anatolia west toward the Levant and east into Elam. For the first time, the resources of faraway lands flowed regularly into Mesopotamia, enriching its people and fueling its expansion. Akkad was not just an empire of conquest, it was a web of exchange connecting distant worlds. As you pause by a marketplace, you see jars of fragrant resin from Arabia, glimmering shells from the Persian Gulf, and textiles dyed in brilliant colors. Merchants squat by their wares, eyes, sharp hands, quick their words, flowing like the river. You hear Akkadian, Sumerian, Amorite, and other tongues all blending into the same marketplace murmur. The air smells of roasted onions, spiced stew, and the faint sweetness of honey cakes sold to passing travelers. An ancient and curious tidbit stirs some Akkadian merchants used tiny cylinder seals carved with intricate images to stamp contracts into clay. These seals, worn on cords around the neck, were as personal as a signature. Picture a trader pressing his seal into a wet tablet, the impression of a lion, or a hunting scene securing an agreement across languages. You imagine the clay drying in the sun, the contract locked as firmly as any modern signature. The road takes you north, where donkeys strain under heavy loads of tin, the precious metal needed to make bronze. Without tin, copper is only soft, easily bent. With tin, it becomes the lifeblood of weapons, tools, and power. You feel the importance of these caravans every hoofstep, echoing the truth that empire is as fragile as its supply lines. Historians still argue how tightly Akkad controlled these trade networks. Did the empire truly dominate long-distance exchange, or did it simply skim the wealth that already flowed between regions? The tablets record shipments and tribute, but the scale of control remains debated. What is certain is that Akkad's influence stretched further than any power before it, its name known even in lands it never conquered. Night falls and the caravan halts. Fires are lit, their smoke curling into the cool air. Merchants sit cross-legged, sharing bread and beer, their laughter carrying softly in the dark. Guards keep watch at the edges, spears resting across their knees, eyes scanning for bandits or prowling wolves. You settle among them, feeling the warmth of the fire, the scent of wood smoke, the taste of bread, gritty with grain. Above the stars blaze countless and steady. You trace the constellations the travelers use to guide their paths as sure as the rivers below. Trade is more than wealth. It is connection, a thread that binds distant people into a shared story. And in this quiet moment you realize that Sargon's empire is not only a realm of conquest, but also a bridge across lands, a network of roads and rivers carrying both goods and ideas. As you drift to sleep beside the caravan fire, you feel the empire breathing around you, its soldiers, its merchants, its priests, its farmers, all bound together in a fragile humming web. Tomorrow the donkeys will rise, the wheels will turn, the roads will stretch further still. And the name of Akkad will ride with them, stamped into every tablet, whispered in every market, glowing like firelight on the horizon. The caravan roads fade behind you as you step into a hall heavy with incense and echoes. Sargon has passed from the stage, and now his grandson rises, Naram-Sin, the self-proclaimed God-King. You feel the air shift thicker, heavier, charged with ambition, greater even than Sargon's. Here is a man who refuses to walk in shadows of the past. He claims divinity itself, pressing the empire toward its widest reach, and declaring not only his right to rule, but his right to be worshipped. The palace glimmers with banners of Akkad, its courtyards bustling with scribes, generals, and priests. Yet at the center stands Naram-Sin, tall and radiant in ceremonial armor. His helmet is crowned not with feathers or jewels, but with horns, the ancient symbol of the gods. You hear the whispers around you, no mortal king has dared this before. To wear the horns is to claim divinity, to declare oneself equal to the very powers invoked in temples. A mainstream historical fact steadies your thoughts. Naram-Sin, who ruled in the late 23rd century BCE, was the first Mesopotamian king to openly deify himself during his lifetime. Inscriptions call him the god of Akkad, and his name was spoken in prayers alongside those of the divine. His reign marked the height of Akkadian power, a stretch of empire from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, farther than Sargon himself had ever held. In the streets of Akkad you feel both awe and unease. Merchants bow low when he passes, soldiers salute with trembling hands, and priests hesitate, their lips tight, as they adjust prayers to include his name. Some rejoice at his strength, believing a god-king ensures prosperity. Others murmur in hidden corners, fearing the god's jealousy at such boldness. The city thrums with both devotion and dread. An ancient and curious tidbit drifts into focus. Naram-Sin ordered temples, built not just to the traditional gods, but also to himself. Imagine entering a shrine where incense rises before a statue not of Enlil or Inanna, but of the king himself, seated in majesty, carved in stone. You would bow, place your offering, and whisper a prayer to the living man whose armies guard your fields. The boundary between heaven and earth blurs, unsettling, luminous. You walk beside his troops as they march beyond the rivers, their sickle swords gleaming, their shields painted with the symbols of Akkad. They carry his image on standards, bronze plaques hammered with his likeness, horns crowning his brow. The soldiers chant his name as if it were a divine hymn, their voices pounding in rhythm with their feet. The empire expands not only by force, but by belief that to follow Naram-Sin is to march with a god. Historians still argue how sincere this deification was. Did the people truly see him as a god, or was it a political device, a bold claim meant to silence rivals and unify subjects? Was it reverence, or was it fear? The tablets tell us of his titles, his victories, his temples, but the feelings of ordinary farmers and merchants remain beyond reach. Still the horned crown lingers in every carving and image, too striking to dismiss. In the quiet of night, you wander through Akkad's courtyards. The stars blaze above, yet your eyes return again and again to the statue of Naram-Sin, its shadow long across the paving stones. You imagine the people kneeling there, offering bread oil or incense, their hearts torn between faith in the old gods and loyalty to the living one who commands their lives. The empire hums with new energy, bold and dangerous. Roads extend further, caravans grow longer, temples rise higher, and the boundaries of belief stretch into unknown territory. You feel the exhilaration, the unease, the dizzying sense that history itself has climbed to a peak, looking down over lands vast and fertile. As the night breeze cools your face, you realize the shape of the empire has changed once more. No longer the dream of a humble child set adrift in reeds, no longer the ambition of a warrior uniting city-states. It is now the reign of a man who claims to be more than man. And in that claim, the fate of Akkad glows bright, brilliant, and perilously close to fire. The ground beneath your feet grows steep as you follow Naram-Sin's army into the Zagros Mountains. The air thins sharp and cold, carrying the scent of pine and stone. You hear the crunch of boots against gravel, the snort of pack animals straining under loads, the clatter of bronze weapons against shields. The king has marched far from the flat plains of Akkad, seeking to subdue the mountain people known as the Lalubi. Their lands lie rugged and harsh, their warriors fierce, their raids a constant thorn in the empire's side. The path winds upward into narrow passes, cliffs looming high above. You glance nervously at the ridges, half expecting an ambush. The mountains themselves feel alive, their shadows deep, their silence watchful. Yet the Akkadian army presses on horns, sounding banners snapping in the wind. At the center rides Naram-Sin, the horned crown gleaming on his helmet, his face set in determination. He is not merely marching to battle, he is marching to carve his glory into eternity. A mainstream historical fact steadies your step. The victory of Naram-Sin over the Lalubi is immortalized in the famous victory stele, a stone relief showing the king towering over defeated foes, trampling them beneath his feet. It is one of the earliest works of monumental art to depict a ruler as larger than life, not just leading men, but standing above them as a divine conqueror. You picture the scene as it unfolds. Akkadian soldiers clash with Lalubi warriors who charge down slopes with cries sharp as eagle calls. Their bodies are wiry, their weapons simple, but deadly. Stone axes, wooden spears tipped with bronze. They fight with the ferocity of hunters defending their mountain homes. Yet the Akkadian ranks hold firm shields, locked sickle swords flashing. The clang of metal, the cries of pain, the roar of war drums echo through the valleys. An ancient and curious tidbit lingers in the stone. The victory stele shows stars above Naram-Sin's head, symbols of the gods watching, perhaps even guiding him. The stars glow like tiny suns in the carved sky, suggesting that the heavens themselves sanctioned his triumph. You imagine standing there on the battlefield, looking up to see the real stars piercing the night, and wondering if the gods truly leaned closer to watch one man's rise. Naram-Sin pushes forward, trampling the fallen beneath his sandals. His soldiers lift him on a tide of victory, their voices booming his name. The Lalubi scatter their warriors, broken, their leaders captured. The mountains that once seemed so defiant now echo with Akkadian chants, the sound rolling through ravines like thunder. Historians still argue about the meaning of the stele's imagery. Was Naram-Sin truly deified by his people at this point, or was the depiction symbolic, meant to exalt him as the chosen of the gods? Was the artwork propaganda or sincere reverence? The debate swirls like mountain mist, unresolved, leaving only the image of a man crowned with horns larger than his enemies, striding across stone as though he himself were eternal. After the battle, you walk through the mountain camps. Fires crackle, meat roasts on spits, the air thick with smoke and the laughter of soldiers reveling in victory. Yet amid the celebration you feel the silence of the mountains pressing in. The Lulubi are not gone forever, they will rise again, as mountain peoples always do. But for now, their defeat has been carved not only into memory, but into rock itself. You stand before the stele as it is erected, its surface freshly chiseled, its lines sharp and gleaming in the sun. Naram-Sin towers over all, his figure bold, his enemies crushed. You reach out to touch the cool stone, feeling the grooves beneath your fingertips, knowing that this image will endure long after the voices of the soldiers fade. Night falls and the mountains hum with crickets and owls. The fires die down, leaving the stele standing silent under the stars. You gaze upward, the same stars shining as those carved in stone, and wonder if the heavens truly choose men, or if men carve their own destinies into the rock, hoping eternity will listen. You descend again from the mountains, leaving behind the stone relief that immortalizes Akkadian triumph. The empire glows with power, its reach wide, its king divine in the eyes of many. Yet beneath the bright surface, something quieter stirs. Sumer is not dead, though its cities bow under Akkadian governors, though its temples pay tribute to Akkad. The spirit of Sumer breathes on in whispers, in rituals in clay. You wander through the alleys of Ur, where scribes still teach children the old tongue. Styluses scratch softly across damp clay, forming wedge marks that capture contracts, hymns, and myths. The Akkadian language may spread, but Sumerian remains the sacred tongue of learning and gods. You listen as a young boy reads aloud from a tablet, stumbling yet determined, his voice carrying words that echo back to the earliest days of the cities. The empire may change, but the roots of culture remain. A mainstream historical fact settles into you even after the rise of Akkadian Sumerian endured as a language of scholarship and religion for more than 1,000 years. It became what later generations would call a dead language, no longer spoken in the markets, but kept alive by scribes, priests, and scholars. In this persistence you see resilience, a quiet defiance that no army can erase. Temples, too, preserve the old ways. You enter the sanctuary of Inanna at Uruk, where priests still chant hymns in the ancient tongue. Offerings are laid carefully at her feet, bowls of figs, loaves of bread, and polished stones that glimmer in lamplight. You breathe in the scent of incense, thick and sweet, and hear the faint ringing of silver bells tied to the robes of priestesses as they circle the altar. The gods of Sumer have not abandoned their people, nor have the people abandoned them. An ancient and curious tidbit stirs, some scholars believe, secret cults of Sumerian gods flourished even under Akkadian rule, their rituals hidden from official eyes. In quiet courtyards by the light of oil lamps, worshippers may have sung hymns, forbidden in public, their voices low but unwavering. You imagine such a gathering, now shadows flickering on mud-brick walls, hands lifted in prayer to Enlil, the old storm god, as if refusing to let his name be forgotten. You walk past marketplaces where Akkadian overseers tally tribute, but hear old proverbs muttered by elders in Sumerian. Farmers bent over their fields still whisper traditional prayers to Tammuz for fertile soil. Mothers sing lullabies older than Akkad itself, soothing babies with melodies passed through countless generations. Beneath the empire's weight, Sumer breathes on like embers, glowing faint beneath layers of ash. Historians still argue how deep this cultural survival ran. Did Sumerian identity remain strong and conscious, or was it a slow fading unnoticed even by those who lived it? Were the scribes actively resisting Akkad or simply preserving tradition without thought of rebellion? The debate is endless, the evidence fragmentary. Yet here, in the sounds of old songs and the marks on clay, you sense survival as deliberate, stubborn, and vital. At dusk, the streets of Uruk glow with lanterns. Families gather in courtyards sharing dates and bread, telling stories of Gilgamesh and Enkidu. The tales are older than empire, older than conquest, and each retelling strengthens a thread that binds the people to their past. Children listen wide-eyed, their imaginations carrying them into forests of cedars and battles with monsters. For a moment, Akkad vanishes, and only Sumer remains. You realize that empires conquer bodies, but cultures endure in whispers. Sargon and Naram-Sin may claim to rule the four corners of the world, but in quiet temples and around humble fires, the Sumerians keep their gods, their words, their dreams alive. You hear it in the rhythm of drums, in the scratch of styluses, in the laughter of children chasing one another through dusty lanes. The night settles over the plains. From a ziggurat terrace you gaze at the twin rivers shimmering in moonlight. Their waters carry siltfish reeds and the pulse of memory. Sumer may seem subdued, but beneath Akkad's shadow its resilience glows unbroken, unyielding, waiting for its moment to rise again. The night air trembles with the sound of drums and chants as you walk into a temple precinct where belief and power entwine like reeds along a riverbank. The empire is not only forged by bronze and blood, it is justified by the voices of gods invoked with every offering and every oath. You feel the heavy perfume of incense in your lungs, sweet and sharp, curling upward in thick smoke that vanishes into the darkness. Here in Mesopotamia, gods are everywhere. Ishtar, goddess of love and war, glitters in her temple at Akkad, adorned with lapis beads and golden earrings. Enlil, stormbringer and ruler of destinies, looms large at Nippur, where priests kneel before his sacred statue. Shamash, the sun god, lights the courts of justice, his rays imagined as spears of truth. Every temple is a throne, every shrine a reminder that human rulers serve only at divine pleasure, or so the priests say. A mainstream historical fact steadies your mind. Kings across Mesopotamia sought divine sanction for their wars, inscribing tablets and stelae that proclaimed victories as the will of the gods. To fight an enemy was not merely a contest of armies, but of pantheons. If Uruk fell, it was because Ishtar favored Akkad. If Kish resisted, perhaps Enlil had turned his gaze away. Warfare became theology, fought not only on earth but in heaven. You listen as priests lift hymns to Ishtar, their voices rising and falling in hypnotic waves. Women in shimmering robes sway to the rhythm, their hands scattering petals, their feet stamping dust into patterned circles. The atmosphere is electric, half worship, half declaration of loyalty to the empire. Yet beneath it, you sense unease. For if Naram-Sin calls himself a god, what place remains for the old deities? An ancient and curious tidbit drifts into your ears. Some inscriptions describe omens of war, sought in sheep livers. Priests would slice open the animal, studying the lobes and veins for divine messages, whether the gods favored battle or demanded restraint. Imagine the hush of the room as a priest lifts the glistening organ in firelight, murmuring interpretations that could send thousands to war or hold them back at the brink. The fate of empires decided in the folds of flesh. The temples echo with contradictions. Some priests praise Naram-Sin as chosen, even divine. Others mutter in private that the gods grow jealous, that hubris draws ruin. You feel the tension like a taut string ready to snap. The people bring offerings, but they also whisper questions. If kings are gods, what of Enlil, Shamash, Inanna? Can heaven hold so many thrones? Historians still argue how deeply the people believed these declarations. Did they truly accept Naram-Sin as a deity, or was the language symbolic, meant only to exalt him beyond rivals? Was belief sincere or coerced, by the weight of soldiers and scribes. The evidence is divided, each fragment a flicker of truth that refuses to settle. You step outside the temple into the cool night, the stars glimmering above the dark outline of ziggurats. A hush lingers after the chants, a silence filled with questions. In the distance, thunder rumbles faintly, though no storm crosses the sky. Was it Enlil's warning, or only the echo of drums still beating in your chest? The empire marches on with the gods at its side, or perhaps beneath its feet. You walk among ordinary people, hearing them whisper prayers before sowing fields, calling on Shamash at sunrise, praising Ishtar before battles. For them, the gods remain present, powerful, unpredictable. Yet always now the shadow of Akkad stretches overhead, reshaping belief, reshaping destiny, until faith itself feels caught in a tug of war between heaven and earth. As the night deepens, torches gutter and die, leaving only the stars to watch. You lie down in the shadow of a temple wall, the stones still warm from the day's sun, and listen to the silence. Above you, the gods and kings seem to argue in whispers, their voices tangled, their destinies entwined, as Mesopotamia itself waits to see whose power will endure. The streets of Akkad no longer hum with unshaken certainty. You notice it first in whispers carried through markets, then in the wary glances exchanged at city gates. Though Naram-Sin's banners still fly and soldiers still patrol with polished shields, beneath the surface of the empire something stirs rebellion. The vastness that once seemed a strength now begins to stretch too thin, the edges fraying as distant provinces test the limits of Akkadian grip. You walk through a town along the Euphrates where farmers trade grain reluctantly, their eyes darting away from the officials tallying tribute. The demands of empire are heavy, grain, wool, silver, all flowing north to Akkad, leaving villages lean. Murmurs slip from weary mouths. Why should their harvest feed a distant king who claims to be a god? In the courtyards, stories of resistance spread like sparks carried in songs whispered in the flicker of lamplight. A mainstream historical fact comes into focus. Inscriptions from Naram-Sin's reign describe widespread revolts, as many as 30 cities rising against Akkadian authority. Places that once submitted with bowed heads now dared to lift their gaze, emboldened by one another's defiance. The empire that had once seemed unshakable suddenly groaned under the weight of its own vastness. You wander into a temple where priests still chant hymns, but their tones are subdued. Offerings are fewer, altars less adorned. The people hesitate. Should prayers be given to Naram-Sin as a god, or should the old gods be called upon to humble him? The air feels uneasy, charged with questions that carry danger. An ancient and curious tidbit lingers. In these days, omens were said to multiply, solar eclipses, rivers, running oddly low flocks of birds scattering in strange patterns. To the people, such signs meant the gods were restless, perhaps angered by Naram-Sin's audacity. You imagine the shiver that must have run through crowds as the sun dimmed midday, priests trembling as they declared it a message of warning. The cracks widen, caravans are harried by raiders, border towns bristle with unrest, and in the north and east vassals who once swore loyalty now raise their own banners. Akkadian governors find themselves trapped between loyalty to their king and the fury of local populations. Grain shipments are seized, temples turn cold, soldiers desert to their homelands. Historians still argue whether these rebellions were coordinated uprisings or scattered flare-ups magnified by later accounts. Did 30 cities truly revolt at once, or was the number exaggerated in inscriptions meant to highlight Naram-Sin's eventual victories? The tablets leave the scale uncertain, but the reality of unrest is undeniable. the empire was no longer steady. You picture a rebel city, its gates barred its citizens, armed with whatever tools they can muster. The clang of blacksmiths rings day and night as hoes and sickles are reforged into weapons. Fires glow along the walls, sentries keeping watch for Akkadian forces. Families prepare in silence, their faces drawn with fear and determination. Each stone of the wall feels like defiance, each whisper of prayer a plea to the gods to shield them. The Akkadian response is swift, brutal. You hear the tramp of soldiers, the thunder of rams against gates, the crack of torches lighting rooftops aflame. Rebellion is crushed again and again, yet like weeds in a field, it returns each root refusing to die. The empire spends its strength not expanding outward, but stamping out flames within. As dusk falls, you sit by a canal, the water sluggish reflecting the dim light of torches. Fishermen mutter of strange times, of soldiers taking their catch of taxes, swallowing their gains. The mood is heavy, thick as the humid air. You sense the empire straining, held together by force, yet fraying with each passing season. The night sky above is vast and indifferent. Stars glitter cold and steady, while below the empire trembles in unrest. You realize that empires are not only lost to foreign foes, they are worn away from within, eroded by hunger, anger, and the quiet refusal of people to bend forever. Akkad still shines in banners and palaces, but in the hearts of many, its grip has already begun to loosen. You hear it first as a whisper, carried on the wind from the east. The Gutians are coming. Mountain tribes hardened by rocky slopes and thin air descend from the Zagros like a storm uncoiling. Their language is strange to Mesopotamian ears, their faces unfamiliar, their ways untamed. Where the Akkadians march, with bronze shields gleaming and drums pounding, the Gutians move lean and fast, slipping through passes, striking like wolves in the night. The plainsfolk watch in unease. Farmers pause in their fields, eyes fixed on distant hills, where smoke drifts uncertain if it is the smoke of hearths or burning villages. Merchants in the markets whisper of raids, of caravans stripped bare, of watchtowers overwhelmed. Mothers hush their children with trembling hands, repeating the old prayers louder than before. The Gutians may not bring great armies or shining temples, but they bring something equally dangerous, relentless hunger and freedom from the order that binds empires. A mainstream historical fact steadies your thoughts. The Gutians, a people of uncertain origin, indeed swept into Mesopotamia near the end of the Akkadian Empire, destabilizing its weakened structure. Later, Sumerian texts describe them as uncouth and destructive, who knew not the right cult of the gods, a people without respect for agriculture or temple rites. To the scribes of Mesopotamia, they were the embodiment of chaos intruding upon order. You walk among Akkadian soldiers hastily raising defenses along canals and city walls. Their armor gleams, their formations are disciplined, but there is tension in their eyes. They know the Gutians do not fight as city armies do. They appear suddenly, strike hard, vanish into the hills, leaving terror in their wake. The soldiers' discipline feels heavy, rigid against the wild fluidity of mountain war. An ancient and curious tidbit surfaces from the gloom. Some chronicles claim that Gutian raiders led flocks of captured goats and sheep into Sumerian fields, letting them trample and devour crops as a form of scorched earth warfare. Imagine standing at dawn expecting to see golden barley swaying only to find dust and hoofprints, the earth stripped bare by animals turned into weapons. The empire reels, grain stores run low, canals fall into disrepair, rebellions flare as governors lose control. The Gutians are not conquerors in the Akkadian sense. They do not build ziggurats or impose tribute or weave a bureaucracy. They are like a tearing wind disrupting everything they touch. To Akkad, Already weakened by rebellion and famine, their descent feels like the breaking of a dam. Historians still argue how much destruction the Gutians truly caused. Were they the sole force behind Akkad's collapse, or did they merely hasten what drought, famine, and rebellion had already begun? Were they ruthless invaders or scapegoats blamed by later Sumerians desperate to explain the empire's fall? The tablets echo with bias, leaving only fragments of truth. You picture an Akkadian village after a raid. The gates hang broken, the well lies fouled, the temple is empty, its statues stolen or smashed. Families wander with hollow eyes, clutching what little they can carry. The silence after the Gutians pass is worse than the noise, the absence of order, the unravelling of all that empire promised. At dusk you climb a ridge and gaze eastward. Fires burn in the distance, flickering like angry stars on the horizon. The wind carries the faint cry of horns, raw and unpolished compared to the ordered drums of Akkad. The night feels unsettled, alive with threat. The Gutians move unseen in the dark, and every shadow seems ready to spring. As you lie awake, the ground beneath you cool and hard, you realize that empires can withstand enemies who fight like themselves, armies, sieges, treaties, but they falter against foes who unravel the very fabric of their order. The Gutians bring no single crushing battle. They bring something harder to fight, a storm of small strikes, of unpredictability, of chaos, seeping into every crack of the empire. The stars shimmer above, ancient and silent, while below Akkad trembles. The Gutians are descending, and Mesopotamia will never be the same. The empire that once thundered with the march of armies now stumbles under silence. You walk along a canal that once shimmered with water, its banks alive with reeds and songbirds. Now the mud is cracked dry, the reeds brittle, the birds long gone. Fields stretch before you, but they are not green, they are dust, thin stalks withering beneath a punishing sun. Famine grips the land, and hunger gnaws more cruelly than any spear. In Akkad's marketplaces the air is thick with desperation. Merchants sit behind empty stalls, their eyes hollow, their scales idle. Families shuffle through clutching clay bowls, hoping for grain. The few jars of barley that remain are guarded like treasure, sold for silver, beyond reach of common folk. You hear children crying, their voices raspy from thirst, their bellies swollen from hunger. A mother murmurs an old lullaby, her song quivering as she rocks a child too weak to stir. A mainstream historical fact routes this scene records describe a devastating famine during the late Akkadian period, likely caused by climate shifts that brought drought across Mesopotamia. Archaeologists find evidence of widespread crop failure and dust storms that scarred the land. The empire's carefully balanced irrigation system faltered under these pressures, leaving its people vulnerable, just as rebellions and invasions shook its core. You pass through villages abandoned to dust. Doors hang open, wells lie empty, the silence broken only by the rasp of wind carrying fine grit. Those who remain dig at dry earth, desperate for water that will not come. In temples, priests stand before idols, their voices hoarse as they beg for rain. The smell of burnt offerings drifts in the air, goat's grain, incense, all given to gods who remain silent beneath a blazing sky. An ancient and curious tidbit lingers in the stories. Some tablets describe the famine as divine punishment, with the gods withdrawing their favor after Naram-Sin's hubris. One hymn even laments that the people of Akkad were reduced to eating their own young, though whether literal or symbolic, it reveals the depth of despair. You feel a shiver, imagining such whispers spreading through desperate streets, the line between metaphor and reality blurring in the haze of hunger. The army too begins to unravel. Soldiers once loyal to the horned crown now desert, seeking food for their families. Garrisons' thin walls stand unguarded, caravans vanish. In the north, Gutian raiders sweep down unopposed. In the south, Sumerian cities seize the moment, shaking off Akkadian governors. The empire frays not with the crash of one great defeat, but with the slow, grinding erosion of famine and faith. Historians still argue what role this famine played in the collapse. Was climate the true destroyer of Akkad, or merely one blow among many rebellions, Gutian raids, political overreach? The debate endures because collapse is rarely simple, and here you feel that truth, pressing in no single sword, ended Akkad, but a storm of troubles all at once. You walk through Akkad itself, the once great capital. The streets are quiet, the palace walls cracked, the scribes' tablets gathering dust. Statues of kings stand, eroded their features, worn by sand and time. In the temple courtyards, only a handful of priests linger their chants, hollow, their eyes turned upward, as if waiting for gods who no longer listen. As dusk falls, the sky glows a deep red, the sun dimmed by dust storms that rise from the horizon. The air tastes of grit, dry and bitter. You look out over the land that once blossomed with wheat and barley, now a wasteland of parched soil and broken canals. The empire of Sargon and Naram-Sin lies, scattered, its glory reduced to whispers in clay, its people scattered like seeds, cast into barren ground. You breathe in the silence, heavy and final, and realize you are standing at the end of a dream. Akkad, once master of the four quarters of the world, has unraveled not with one loud shatter, but with countless quiet fractures until nothing remains whole. The air feels different now, softer, as though the land itself is exhaling after years of drought and chaos. You walk once more along the banks of the Euphrates, where water glimmers in the morning light. Canals long choked with silt and neglect are being dredged by men with baskets and shovels. Their voices carry in low songs steady as they lift mud and restore the lifeblood of Sumer. The age of Akkad is gone, but out of its collapse rises something new, revival. At the heart of this renewal stands Ur, reborn under the rule of Ur-Nammu. You enter the city and see scaffolds rising around a grand new ziggurat, its bricks freshly molded, their surfaces smooth and pale beneath the sun. Workers clamber up ramps carrying baskets of clay on their shoulders. Priests move among them, sprinkling water, blessing the work as sacred. Where famine and rebellion once hollowed Mesopotamia, now order and vision return. A mainstream historical fact steadies your thoughts, Ur-Nammu founder, of the third dynasty of Ur, around 2112 BCE, restored Sumerian strength and order. He is remembered not only as a builder, but as a lawgiver, creating one of the earliest known law codes centuries before Hammurabi's. His reign marks the flowering of a Sumerian renaissance when art, architecture, and scholarship flourished again after the Akkadian collapse. You walk through the streets of Ur alive, with markets bustling once more. Merchants lay out baskets of barley jars, of honey bolts of wool dyed with deep hues. The smell of roasting lamb mixes with the sweet tang of dates. Laughter rises in the air, children racing one another through narrow alleys. Hope glimmers in every corner, fragile but real. An ancient and curious tidbit delights you. Fragments of Ur-Nammu's law code have survived inscribed in cuneiform on clay. They contain provisions about theft, marriage, and injury, assigning fines rather than brutal punishments. Unlike later codes of Hammurabi, which often demanded an eye for an eye, Ur-Nammu's justice leaned more toward restitution, restoring balance, rather than escalating vengeance. You imagine a scribe reading such a decree aloud in the marketplace, the people nodding as fairness rather than fear is spoken into law. Temples flourish again. you step into the new shrine of Nana the moon god, where oil lamps glow against freshly painted walls. Priests chant hymns in the old tongue of Sumer, their voices resonant and strong. The scent of incense curls upward, mingling with the cool air drifting from the temple's high windows. Unlike in Akkad's final days, the gods now seem closer, their favor restored by steady hands and faithful hearts. Historians still argue how much of this revival was truly stable. Was the third dynasty of Ur a lasting restoration, or merely a bright flicker before new powers rose again? Some see it as the final glorious chapter of Sumer, while others call it a brief pause in the inevitable shift toward Babylonian dominance. The truth, like the rivers themselves, flows uncertainly between both views. You climb the new ziggurat's ramp as the sun sets its light, painting the bricks in glowing gold. At the top, the city spreads beneath you, canals, winding fields, stretching green once more. Smoke curls from countless hearths, a sign not of destruction, but of families cooking meals of life reborn. You hear music drifting from courtyards, lyres plucked in celebration, voices lifted in songs of love and harvest. In this moment you sense the resilience of Mesopotamia. Empires may fall, kings may claim divinity and crumble, yet the people endure. They dredge canals, rebuild temples, and pass on laws. They write hymns, carve tablets, and tell stories of gods and heroes. From the ashes of Akkad and Ur rises not as a shadow, but as a light. The night wraps the city in calm. Moonlight spills over the ziggurat, casting long shadows across the fields. The voice of Ur-Nammu carries faintly from the palace, issuing decrees not of conquest, but of order and fairness. For now the land breathes easier, its scars healing its people, finding hope again beneath the glow of the moon, God's watchful gaze. The streets of Ur quiet as night deepens. And in that hush another kind of voice rises, not the decree of kings, nor the chants of priests, but the murmured recitation of a tale older than empire. You follow it through narrow alleys into a courtyard where families sit cross-legged on woven mats. An elder clears his throat and begins to recite his words, rolling like the river, steady and solemn. It is the story of Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, the hero who sought immortality. You lean in close, the firelight flickering on faces, as the elder speaks of Gilgamesh and Enkidu, the wild man tamed by friendship. He tells of their battles with Humbaba in the cedar forest, of the bull of heaven sent by Ishtar, of Enkidu's death, and Gilgamesh's grief. The tale swells with longing, courage, and sorrow, and in every listener's eyes you see recognition, because though the kings of Akkad and Ur may rise and fall, the fragility of life is a truth all people know. A mainstream historical fact steadies this moment. The Epic of Gilgamesh is the world's oldest surviving epic, composed in Sumerian and Akkadian across centuries, finely preserved on clay tablets. It tells not only of gods and monsters, but of the search for meaning in mortality. In Mesopotamia it was copied and retold for over 1,000 years, a thread binding generations together. The elder's voice dips low as he recounts Gilgamesh's journey to Utnapishtim, survivor of a great flood, who reveals that death cannot be escaped. You feel the stillness settle like dew, the listeners holding their breath. Even the children sit quiet, their eyes wide, as if sensing the gravity in the story's silence. The night air cools, carrying the smell of smoke and baking bread from nearby ovens. An ancient and curious tidbit stirs some tablets to describe how professional storytellers would carry versions of Gilgamesh's tale from city to city, reciting in marketplaces and temple courtyards. They were living books, their memories holding entire epics. Imagine sitting at a busy bazaar at dusk, listening as a traveller unfurls a story instead of cloth, weaving words instead of wool. You can almost hear the coins clink into his jar, the applause echo in narrow streets. The story continues, and you drift with Gilgamesh across mountains and seas. You feel his despair when the plant of life is stolen by a serpent, leaving him to return home empty-handed. The elder's voice softens. Gilgamesh accepts his mortality at last, finding solace not in eternity but in the walls of Uruk he built, in the legacy of his city. Around you, the listeners nod slowly, comforted by the idea that what endures is not the body but the story, the name, the work left behind. Historians still argue how much of the epic reflects real kingship and how much is myth. Was there truly a Gilgamesh who ruled Uruk, or is he a composite of memories shaped into legend by centuries of retelling? The tablets offer fragments, names, reigns, echoes, but the line between fact and fable blurs, as it always does when history turns into myth. The fire crackles low, and the elder ends his recitation. Silence hangs for a breath before soft clapping and murmurs ripple through the courtyard. Children curl against their mother's eyes, heavy with dreams of heroes and gods. The elder leans back, satisfied, the story passed once more from old to young. You step into the night, the stars glimmering bright above. The tale lingers in your chest like a slow drumbeat, soothing eternal. The Epic of Gilgamesh is more than a story. It is a reminder that even as empires collapse, even as kings fall, words endure. Stories become the true immortality carried in memory, etched in clay, whispered into the dark. And so you walk through Ur's sleeping streets, the voice of Gilgamesh following like a shadow, gentle and enduring, binding you to a world that refuses to be forgotten. The fires of empire have dimmed, yet their glow lingers across the land. You wander through broken gates and silent courtyards, hearing echoes of Sargon's armies and Naram-Sin's proclamations still humming faintly in the air. Though Akkad has fallen, its shadow stretches onward, shaping the dreams of those who come after. Babylon and Assyria will one day rise, and in their banners, in their gods, in their laws, you will glimpse Akkad's reflection. You pause in a scribe's chamber, where clay tablets are stacked neatly along shelves. A young apprentice presses his stylus into wet clay, copying ancient hymns and decrees. The name Sargon appears again and again, etched in sharp wedges, followed by titles that later kings will claim for themselves: King of the Four Quarters, Ruler of the Universe. Though Akkad's walls have crumbled, its words endure, carried forward into the hearts of empires not yet born. A mainstream historical fact steadies your thoughts. Akkadian became the lingua franca of Mesopotamia, and beyond, a language of diplomacy and trade used for centuries after the empire itself had vanished. Even distant kingdoms wrote to one another in Akkadian, the script of power. It outlived the kings who first raised its banners, embedding itself into the very bones of history. You walk past a workshop where artisans carve cylinder seals, rolling patterns into clay. Among the images are echoes of Akkadian motifs: kings towering above enemies, gods granting authority, stars glimmering as signs of favor. These symbols will not vanish. They will reappear in Babylonian reliefs, in Assyrian palaces, in stories told long after Akkad's name is dust. An ancient and curious tidbit stirs centuries after Akkad's collapse. Legends of Sargon's birth in a river basket were still retold, inspiring later rulers who sought to cast themselves as chosen by destiny. Even in distant lands, fragments of his tale survived, reshaped into new myths. His story became a template, a myth of humble origins, rising to glory, echoed in cultures far beyond Mesopotamia. You climb a hill where ruins lie, scattered walls reduced to stumps of clay bricks crumbling back into earth. Grass pushes between the cracks, birds wheel overhead, yet the silence does not feel empty. You sense that this place is still alive, its spirit carried in every story told of kingship, conquest, and empire. Akkad may be gone, but it has written itself into memory. Historians still argue about Akkad's true size and strength. Was it a tightly controlled state with roads, governors, and law, or a looser confederation held together by charisma and fear? Was its collapse sudden or stretched across decades? The tablets leave gaps, and so Akkad flickers between clarity and legend, half seen through the dust of time. Yet perhaps that is its truest legacy, to remain not only history, but mystery. Night falls, and you walk through fields where farmers guide oxen beneath the stars. They do not speak of Akkad anymore. Their lives are tied to soil, to water, to the rhythm of planting and harvest. Yet, unknowingly, they live in a world shaped by Akkad's memory, its language, its gods, its very idea of empire. You tilt your head back, watching constellations blaze across the dark. The same stars that Naram-Sin carved into his stele still shine, the same heavens that priests once read, for omens still whisper above. Empires rise and fall, but the sky endures, carrying memories like a silent archive. And as the cool night breeze brushes your face, you realize that Akkad's legacy is not just in broken walls or forgotten cities. It is in the stories etched into clay, in the languages carried forward, in the dreams of rulers who followed. Akkad became the first empire, and in doing so it became a seed, one that sprouted again and again long after its roots had withered. The night deepens as you walk the quiet fields where reeds rustle along the riverbanks and the moon drifts low across the sky. The voices of Akkad and Sumer mingle faintly like echoes carried on the breeze. Cities once proud Uruk-ish, Akkad itself, now lie in ruin, their bricks crumbling, their names fading. Yet their memory glows not in walls or palaces, but in stories whispered by the earth. You step carefully across broken ground, feeling the clay bricks beneath your feet, their edges softened by centuries. In your hand you hold a tablet, its surface etched with wedge-shaped marks. The words speak of harvests of kings of gods. They are small things, yet they are everything, the attempt of fragile humans to leave their voices pressed into time. You sense how deeply Sumer and Akkad taught the world that memory could be made durable, that words could outlive flesh. A mainstream historical fact steadies your thoughts. The fall of Akkad gave rise once more to Sumerian city-states, only for them to be absorbed in time by Babylon and Assyria. The rhythm of Mesopotamia was always the same: cities, rising empires, collapsing new powers, building on old foundations. Akkad did not vanish completely. It became a stepping stone, a model for every empire that followed, and yet an ancient and curious tidbit clings to the ruins. Later Sumerian poems cursed the Gutians as the scourge of the land, blaming them for the collapse of Akkad, even calling them people who knew not bread or beer. Whether fair or not, these words reveal how deeply the memory of chaos scarred the survivors. To them, the fall of Akkad was not merely politics or famine, it was the anger of gods made manifest in human form. Historians still argue how much is truth and how much is myth. Was Akkad's end the work of invaders or of climate or of its own ambition stretched too far? Were the Gutians destroyers or simply inheritors of a land already broken? The answers remain blurred, as if the rivers themselves washed them away. What endures is not certainty, but story, the tale of how empires fall and how memory reshapes them. You walk into the silence of a ziggurat long abandoned. The steps are cracked weeds sprouting between the bricks, yet as you climb, you feel the weight of all who once ascended here with offerings in hand. At the summit, the wind brushes your skin, carrying the smell of earth and water. You gaze out across the plains where darkness spreads unbroken, save for the shimmer of stars and the silver gleam of the river. Akkad and Sumer blur together, now their stories intertwined. One gave birth to writing cities, temples, the roots of civilization. The other forged the idea of empire of unity under one rule of ambition that stretched beyond horizons. Both have fallen, yet both remain carried in clay, in myth, in memory. You breathe in the night and feel them settle inside you, not gone, but absorbed into the marrow of history. The rivers whisper, the stars gleam, and the land lies quiet. You close your eyes, letting the silence wash over you until the noise of armies, the chants of priests, and the cries of rebels fade into stillness. What remains is a story fragile yet eternal, etched not only in clay tablets but in the hearts of all who still wonder where empire began. And now the story softens the tempo, slows, and you find yourself drifting further from the noise of conquest and collapse. The fields lie empty, the battles silenced, the temples quiet. All that remains is the soft rustle of reeds along the water and the gentle lap of the rivers against their banks. The Euphrates and Tigris flow on, patient and unhurried, carrying silt, carrying memory, carrying time itself. You breathe deeply, the air cool, and still the stars above, shimmering like scattered grains of barley spilled across black soil. Each one flickers with a quiet steadiness, reminding you that long before Akkad rose, long after Sumer fell, the sky has always remained. Empires come and go, but the heavens keep their rhythm calm and eternal. The wind brushes your cheek soft as a whisper, carrying the faint scent of clay and water. You let your shoulders loosen, your body sink deeper into the stillness. No drums beat here, no swords clash, no priests chant. There is only the hush of night long and comforting, cradling you like a warm blanket. Imagine yourself lying by the riverbank, the earth cool beneath your back, the reeds swaying gently above you. The water murmurs a lullaby, steady and soothing. The voices of the past drift further away, fading like echoes in the distance, until only the rhythm of your own breath remains. Slowly, softly, you let go of kings and battles, of walls and ruins, of questions left unanswered. What matters now is rest. The rivers flow, the stars shine, the night watches over you. And as your eyes grow heavy, you surrender to the quiet, carried gently downstream into sleep. Sweet dreams.